My name is Captain Marjorie Langston, though to most who served alongside me I was simply the Lone Watch. I earned that name because I preferred the quiet posts no one else wanted, the midnight guard, the remote observation towers, the stretches of silence where the only sound was my own breathing. I was born on May 2, 1967, in Kittery Point, Maine, in a weathered 18th-century saltbox house my grandfather swore was haunted by colonial soldiers. My earliest memories are wrapped in the sharp scent of salt air, the boom of foghorns in the distance, and the creak of floorboards under unseen feet. My father, a Navy man, carried discipline like a second skin, but he also carried distrust of politicians, of war profiteers, of anyone who called themselves a patriot without knowing the cost. He taught me that wars weren't simply won or lost, they were engineered, manipulated, played out like chess by hands the public never saw. Those conversations stayed with me. By the time I was a teenager, I wasn't just reading history books, I was living inside them. I walked the old fort walls near my hometown, imagining the soldiers who once stood there, wondering if they knew who they were really fighting for. I carried a King James Bible in my rucksack for reasons I couldn't explain, alongside a tattered copy of The Art of War. I wasn't religious in the traditional sense, but I respected the idea of a higher order. Still, I put my faith in human strategy more than divine will. I enlisted in the army at 22, serving in conflicts that don't make it into documentaries. I never married, never had children, and I was fine with that. My life was the mission, observing, reporting, holding the line. Even in retirement, I took private contracts in dangerous places, choosing solitude over company. I didn't know it then, but all of that, the years of watching, the distrust, the discipline, was preparing me for what happened on July 14, 2025. That was the night my watch took me somewhere no soldier should ever stand. When the floor of that fort gave way, I expected to hit stone, wood, anything solid. Instead, I felt weightless, not like falling, but like being taken. My eyes opened into blackness so complete it felt alive, pressing against me from every side. The air was cold enough to bite, but it carried a heavy, metallic tang that coated my tongue. I reached instinctively for my flashlight, my radio, anything, but there was nothing in my hands, nothing on my body. Then came the motion. I was sinking, slow at first, as if through deep water, but there was no resistance. My boots, or what felt like boots, brushed against something that shifted beneath me. The darkness began to thin, not into light, but into shapes. First, they were only shadows, tall and still. As I drew closer, faces emerged from them. Soldiers, dozens at first, then hundreds, from every era I'd ever studied. A Roman centurion with rusted armor, a Confederate officer with half his jaw gone, a modern Marine whose eyes were milk-white and sightless. They stood in rigid formations, but their feet were buried in a thick, bubbling tar. The tar hissed and spat as if it were alive, lapping at their shins, pulling them deeper inch by inch. The smell hit me next. Not just the stench of decay, but something sharper, the acrid scent of burnt powder, mingled with the coppery tang of blood. I realized the air was filled with low, constant sounds, muffled cries, chains dragging, whispers too faint to catch. And then I saw them. My father, still in his navy whites, but his mouth sewn shut with thick black thread. His eyes were wide, wet, desperate. Beside him stood Corporal Jensen, my friend, my brother in arms, the man whose laughter got me through nights in the desert. but his face was locked in an eternal scream, barbed wire wrapped around his head like a crown. They didn't move toward me. They only stared, as if my presence here was a betrayal in itself. A shift in the ground broke my gaze. The tar under my feet began to pull, and my body moved without my will. The soldiers on either side turned their heads in eerie unison, watching as I was dragged forward. The darkness around us thickened again, but now I saw faint glimmers, not of light, but of fire. Small bursts flashed in the distance, like musket fire on an endless battlefield. As I was pulled closer, the ground became stone, black, slick, and wet as if it had been crying for centuries. The air grew hotter, the whispers louder. I could almost make out words, but they tangled together, an endless chorus of accusations and confessions. Somewhere ahead, there was a structure, massive, looming, its outline jagged like broken teeth. It pulsed with a dull, reddish glow that made my stomach twist. I didn't know what it was, but I knew I was being taken there. And whatever waited inside, it was aware of me. I wanted to turn, to run, but the tar had claimed my legs entirely now. The soldiers around me began to bow their heads, not in respect, but in submission. That's when I realized this wasn't a place where wars ended. This was a place where they never stopped. The pulling stopped at the base of the structure. 2 towering gates stood before me, each made of interlocked weapons, swords, rifles, bayonets, all rusted and dripping. They opened inward with a groan that sounded too much like a dying man's breath. I crossed the threshold. And that's when I heard it, a voice, calm yet cutting, saying my name, Captain Marjorie Langston, the voice repeated, steady and measured. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The sound carried weight that pressed down on me harder than the heat in the air. The chamber I'd entered stretched endlessly, its high black arches covered in banners that seemed alive, flags from every era I knew, each one split down the middle, edges smouldering. Portraits hung between them, not of heroes, but of leaders whose eyes had been gouged out. At the far end stood a man in a flawless 18th century officer's coat. His tricorn had shadowing eyes that still burned through me. I knew him instantly. Every American does. Benedict Arnold. He studied me in silence for what felt like minutes, as if measuring the worth of speaking at all. Then, in a voice both weary and sharp, he said, betrayal is not a single act. It is built, layer by layer, under the banner of loyalty, or until the blade is drawn. He gestured to the massive table between us. Its surface was no ordinary map. It shifted and bled as I looked at it. Red lines twisted across oceans and centuries. Colonial battlefields bled into modern cities. Troop movements from centuries ago overlapped with satellite imagery of now. The map stopped changing. One spot pulsed, a deep, almost living crimson, inside the outline of the United States. My throat tightened before I even knew why. This, Arnold said, his voice low, is the snare set for Trump. The chamber filled with sound, 1,000 voices, layered and chaotic, chanting accusations, oaths, secrets. I saw movement in the shadows. Figures emerged, shoving things into my hands, crumpled orders, blood-stained photographs, signed agreements that dissolved into ash when I looked too long. Each one was evidence of something recent, not history, plans in motion, betrayals unfolding now. You were the watcher, Arnold said, stepping closer. Now you must be the warner. And you will be hated for it, as I was hated. But silence. He leaned in so close I could smell the faint metallic rot on his breath. Silence will damn you. I shook my head, wanting to deny, wanting to wake up, but the ground shifted again. The soldiers I had seen earlier now lined the edges of the chamber. They moved forward in unison, their faces twisted with grief and rage. Hands shot out, clawing at my arms, my face, my chest. Their touch burned like branding irons. I looked down and saw symbols seared into my skin. Some I recognized from history, others I didn't. All of them hurt in a way that went deeper than flesh. Arnold didn't move to stop them. His expression was pity, not mercy. This is the mark of those who know and do nothing. You will carry it until you speak. The pain was blinding. My knees buckled. The heat of the brands spread through me like fire under the skin. The soldiers' faces hovered inches from mine, their eyes searching me for an answer I couldn't give. Then, a sound like a door splintering. Light, pure and unyielding, spilled into the chamber, cutting through the smoke and the voices. The soldiers recoiled. Arnold stepped back into shadow, his voice echoing one last time. Remember the map, Captain. Remember the snare. The light poured into the War Council chamber like a flood, sweeping away the shadows clinging to the stone walls. It wasn't warm at first. It was piercing, almost surgical, cutting through the air until it found me. The soldiers who had been clawing at me fell back, hissing like creatures caught in a sudden blaze. Their brands on my skin stopped burning, but the imprint of them throbbed deep inside me. From within that light, a figure stepped forward. He wasn't framed by fanfare or thunder. There was no crown, no armor. Just a man in a simple robe, his feet bare against the scorched floor. Yet the moment I looked into his face, every thought in my mind dissolved into one certainty: I know you. It wasn't recognition like seeing a familiar stranger. It was the knowing that comes from somewhere deeper than memory. His eyes held every moment of my life at once, the lonely watches under freezing skies, the nights I prayed without knowing if anyone listened, the times I swallowed the truth because speaking it felt too dangerous. There was no judgment in those eyes, but neither was there ignorance. He knew it all. Marjorie, he said softly, and my name in his voice was like hearing it for the first time. You have seen the plans of men, but my Father's plans are greater. The chamber around us began to change. The banners of betrayal curled inward, disintegrating into ash that floated upward and vanished. The gouged-out portraits mended, their eyes restored. Even the black tar seeping across the floor thinned, revealing a smooth white surface beneath. You cannot keep what you have seen inside, he continued. It will rot you from within. Speak, but speak with truth, not rage. Warn them, but do not become like those who plotted in darkness. I wanted to answer, to promise I would, but my throat was locked. It was as if every word I might say had to be weighed before it left my mouth. He reached out his hand, and the moment his palm touched my shoulder, the brands carved into my flesh vanished. The pain that had been coiled around my ribs like wire loosened and fell away. Then he stepped back into the light, and it grew impossibly bright. I felt my body being pulled upward, faster and faster, the oppressive heat of hell peeling away until all that surrounded me was that blinding brilliance. I heard his voice one last time, not from in front of me but from everywhere. Remember the map. Remember the snare. And remember, I am with you when you speak. The light consumed everything. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. I opened my eyes to fluorescent panels and the sharp scent of antiseptic. A nurse was shouting for the doctor. My chest was heaving. I was back, but nothing about me was the same. They said I had been unconscious for almost 6 minutes. 6 minutes without breath, without a heartbeat. 6 minutes where my body lay crumpled on that stone floor beneath the fort while rescue teams scrambled to find me. But to me, it had felt like hours. Hours in that war council chamber. Hours under the weight of Benedict Arnold's stare. Hours in the presence of the one who had pulled me out. I lay in that hospital bed with an oxygen mask strapped to my face, staring at the ceiling, feeling the phantom heat of hell still clinging to my skin. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the map, its shifting lines, its bleeding centuries, the pulsing red spot on the United States. I could hear Arnold's voice, not as a sound but as a pressure in my chest. This is the snare set for Trump. And layered over it, the final words of Jesus. Remember the map. I am with you when you speak. My old instincts kicked in first. The soldier in me wanted to classify, cross-reference, verify. Was the map a literal place? A military operation? An event on the horizon? I started mentally scanning the intel I'd been exposed to over the years. Patterns in troop movements, political tension points, even the kinds of coded communications that don't show up in public channels. Part of me wanted to chalk it all up to hypoxia, the brain's last flares before shutting down. But the other part of me, the part that had felt that hand on my shoulder, knew better. The clarity of the experience was too sharp, too precise to be a hallucination. I could still smell the burnt gunpowder. I could still feel the pull of the tar under my feet. I could still see my father, mouth sewn shut, and Jensen wrapped in barbed wire. Those images weren't fading with time. They were embedding themselves. That's when the struggle began. My old self didn't want this. She wanted the clean lines of strategy and logistics, the comfort of staying in the realm of human control. She wanted to forget the chamber, forget Arnold's warning, forget that I had seen the face of Christ in a place where no light should have been. Because to remember meant responsibility. And responsibility meant risk. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd jolt awake at 3:17 a.m., heart pounding, the shape of the map burned into my vision. I began scribbling down everything I could recall, filling pages with notes that looked half like intelligence reports and half like scripture. My hands would shake as I wrote. I didn't know who these words were for, only that they had to be recorded. And yet, fear crept in. Fear that speaking would make me a target. Fear that I'd be dismissed as a paranoid veteran chasing ghosts. Fear that I'd fail to warn the right people in time. But the greater fear, the one that tightened like a vice in my chest, was that staying silent would make me complicit in whatever was coming. In the stillness of those nights, I would whisper a prayer, something I had never done with sincerity before. Not for safety, but for courage. Courage to speak. Courage to withstand the backlash. Courage to hold the line again, not against enemy fire, but against deception that ran deeper than politics. And every time, in that silence, I would hear the echo of his words, do not carry the poison of their rage in your heart. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I knew this was no longer just my battle. It was my calling. Once I accepted that silence was no longer an option, the soldier in me came alive again. But this time, the orders weren't coming from any human chain of command. I began piecing together a plan the way I'd plan a recon mission. My notes from the hospital became a field manual, descriptions of the map, the red pulsing location, the symbols branded into my skin before Jesus erased them. I contacted a handful of people I trusted from my service days, not many, because I knew the fewer who knew, the better. Some listened with grim attention. Others dismissed it as stress-induced hallucination. I didn't blame them. If our positions were reversed, I might have reacted the same way. I started tracking political developments, troop movements, and security events that mirrored the energy of the snare I'd seen. I cross-referenced them against locations from the map in my vision. Patterns began to emerge, and the patterns unsettled me. Still, this wasn't just about gathering intelligence anymore. It was about finding the courage to deliver the warning without poisoning it with fear or anger. Every night, I prayed for discernment, for timing, for the right words when the moment came. I had been the lone watch for most of my life, the one on the edge, observing. Now, I was something else entirely. I was the lone messenger. And my mission had only just begun. It has been months since that night, yet it feels as if I left part of myself in that chamber and brought something far greater back with me. I no longer live only as a soldier. I live as a witness. The map, the snare, the warning, they are etched into me more deeply than any scar. I rise each morning with a clarity I never knew before. My prayers are no longer empty words but lifelines. I seek truth with the same discipline I once guarded an outpost, knowing that the true battle is fought in the shadows before the first shot is fired. When I think of Whalebach Lighthouse cutting through the fog back home, I understand now. Its light wasn't just to warn ships. It was to remind me that even in the blackest night, there is a beam meant to guide. And for as long as I have breath, I will be that beam.